So I think that was a very important session and to have, and I think it deserves a lot of thought behind whether we as a group come up with a carbohydrate quality index or not, based on GI, based on fibre, based on sugar, added sugars, free sugars, content, or liquid versus solid. That's the sort of thing that has gone into previous carbohydrate quality indices. So just as a show of hands at this point in time, who would like to see the group come up with a scientifically based, and we might have to develop the database to do it, a carbohydrate quality index that could be used for, say, food labelling or in nutrition research? Who? Hands up? Nobody. Well, that solves that.
Hi, Jenny.
We can all go
Hi,
home.
Jenny. Hi, Jenny.
I'm actually. Walter, you have something?
Hi, Jenny.
Well, Walt put his
No,
hands
I
up.
actually have
first.
been thinking about this quite a bit. Seeing, really is a plethora, thanks to David. Ever since you come up with the glycemic index, now there have been insulinic index and inflammation index and now quality index. That, as if you talk to a pure physiologist or basic scientist, they would be bark at you. So the reason why you created index is we don't understand. We are acknowledging we don't understand. That's why we need index. Now, for the reductionists in us, as the hardcore scientists, we wanted to understand as much as possible. What the great thing about glycemic index, as I have tried to illustrate it for the past 20-some years of works in this area, is it happened to be biologically supported. In fact, in our publication, AJCN 2001 and 2003, the three papers clearly explain what it means now, because using glycemic index, you can, for the first time, standardize. It's like standardized carbohydrate by glucose, which is a physiologically measurable and can be validated biomarkers. That this assay, then we can compare different carbohydrate across the board. In fact, prior to that, as for now with the limitation of the diet hard hypothesis, I remember, if you look at all these available prospective cohort studies until then, until the nurses study come out, and until the glycemic index and glycemic low variable being created in those cohorts, in the nurses cohorts and the Harvard cohorts, when I reviewed the literature doing my background doctoral works underwater supervision, was essentially no, meaning like all the published prospective cohort study then, by simply looking at carbohydrate with, let's say, diabetes or heart disease, if you do a meta-analysis, lump them together, there's absolutely no relationships. Exactly is the issue of basically showing indirectly there is a lot of heterogeneities across carbohydrate. So the point is basically indirectly confirming what Marianne's presentation, not all carbohydrates equal, and yet we don't know how to compare them until glycemic index come along. So our paper, the Harvard papers, including Samaran, who's a fellow, also worked underwater from Mexico, did the diabetes analysis for the first time with glycemic index and glycemic low, and the way that we do it is essentially for the first time we were able to biologically compare a common measure of dietary carbohydrate. But since then, we have not been able to develop another thing. So I'm very, very actually against this kind of confusion, actually create more confusions, like inflammatory index, even including insulin in a score that you have done, which is, but it's difficult because those are not as accurate. By showing so many index, we probably would confuse the public. Now, That said, if we are truly just from the perspective of guiding, public health, you would argue guideline and whatnot, that you could use like the healthy eating index or the alternative healthy eating index as a whole that have been validated in some of the high quality prospective cohort studies. Wow, that's a long breath after.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Well said. Walter.
What?
Coming. Yes. Well, thanks everybody who presented, and that raised many important issues and insights on this issue of the overall index versus the components. I do think it is useful to look at both, and they really do have different potential applications. Some of them for research purposes. I think like where, say, the inflammatory index, dietary inflammatory index, where many components of the diet contribute to something, you may miss an effect if you're only looking at one piece at a time. So having something that pulls the pieces together into one variable gives you the power you need to see that there is something going on. But that may be totally different than using it for dietary guidance or advice. But I quite agree, as someone said, that you can, and also that Jeff said, that the indices can obscure and mislead us as well. And that's one reason that I pretty much always try to, if we're publishing something with an index, also look at the components of the index. And this applies to ultra-processed foods as well, that if you look at the components, in virtually all of our studies, I'm sure you can find some exception, if you look at the components, it's mainly driven by sugar-sweetened beverages and sometimes also processed meat. So you can put in anything else, and those are really powerful. You can put any other food into that index, blueberries, greens, asparagus, and it's still going to look awful. But what's happening is that because the overall index shows an adverse effect, people are then generalizing to say everything in that score has an adverse effect. And that I think is where, what I think it's partly what Jeff was saying, that the index can be misleading that way. But if we want to look at the question is, can we find an overall dietary pattern that is useful and clear and predictive for things like how much disease could we potentially avoid by a shift to a good diet, then it's useful in that context. But I still think looking at the components is useful. But on a little bit different note, what you did, Simon, was really fantastic with the NHANES data and creating this database. I did want to ask a question, though, because it looks like we're making great progress in the United States because the overall glycemic index has come down. But you also said that sugar-sweetened beverages are now the major contribution to glycemic load. And I'm wondering if that's just because we're drinking more sugar-sweetened beverages. And I wonder if you had looked into that, what looks like, and it also does relate to, we sort of, again, have these two dimensions, the 3D histogram that Jeff showed and that I showed too, of pretty much independent associations of glycemic index, and then orthogonal to that dietary fiber or cereal fiber or something in that range. These are independent, both important, maybe some more important or less important for different outcomes, but both important overall. But in a third component that I should have mentioned before, and nobody did till you really showed the data, it's almost orthogonal, is sugar-sweetened beverages. And that was shown in Jeff's analysis that we published last year too, that almost independently adds almost equally to the glycemic index and fiber or cereal fiber. So anyway, that's just something we all need to keep in mind. It's sort of easy to forget that there's sugar-sweetened beverages out there, at least in some populations, and even worse, like in Mexico. It's such an important part of the picture.
Same thing in China. The kids are very
It's-
See, sometimes the Chinese folks, I'm Chinese myself, 35 years ago, but
You
I
still
think
are.
it look, yeah, I'm still are. So really, the one thing that unify me for my sort of like adopted country, who I deeply in love and also my motherland I still in love with, it is love, really is. But looking their data in a practical manner, this is also in the past 30, 25 years that I started to more engage with working with them. It's actually very interesting, really interesting. I don't know how to put it. The data sharing is, at the end of the day, we are scientists, we are people. At the personal level, we can establish those relationships and create some insight from the data. But like at the national level, once politics are involved, during the past 10 years of these geopolitical tensions, sharing data become almost like, I really have almost done myself in. Remember, that's what I told you in June in Ottawa. I said I'm a survivor. This is churches to do what we do, actually, to some extent. And now both countries, including, but they have mandate coming from the top, don't want to share data with you. This is something data, in fact, many ordinary Americans don't even know the fact that the Chinese CDC was built by the US CDC, people like me, who was initially trained at the CDC, and then tremendous amount of dollars, the taxpayers' money, was invested in helping China develop a CDC. Some of those data, in fact, in your class of teaching, the Foley trial, in fact, was completely funded by the United States CDC in China that actually show for the first time proving folate supplementation is helpful for preventing UO2 defects that the folate trial in the late 80s and early 90s. That were done. And many of this kind of work. In fact, but I hear you. This is not easy. Very challenging.
Before we do, Jeffrey Livesey, you were wanting to ask a question, I think, or have a comment. You still there, Jeffrey?
Yes, I'm still here. Not particularly, no. What I can do, though, is emphasize that we do want to look at the individual components as a first objective. Then perhaps we can also look at the CQI if there's a need for one.
Yeah, I agree.
But
individual component that is biologically reality rather than a man-made creation. What I meant by that is like, in fact, the technology allows us to measure all these differences now down to the elemental level. For example, ICP-MS can measure food composition as well as from the urine, from your blood, body, 70 element, which that's exactly what we are trying to do now to confirm David's point about whether or not all these dietary intake differences would have to do with the balance of these minerals, the trace elements. And that's at a completely different dimension to assess the health status or literally in a physiological manner to drive the science forward. By creating, like, in fact, we presented the very first paper showing this is based on the Women's Health Study trial linking glycemic load with high sensitivity C-reactive protein that is measurable in the blood. And you could argue that's very direct. Then you create yet another index for information by pulling in IL-6, TNF-alpha. But the whole pathway, the mechanistic pathway is different. By lumping them together, create an index that purely in a sort of like additive manner, you completely misspecify that biological model. Okay. In other words, you're giving the same way to a marker that behave very differently in the body. For example, ILS work on the liver that generate CRP, and the TNF-alpha and the cells, adipocyte. I mean, those are really, very different from using it in a mechanistic understanding to find drug targets and whatnot. But in terms of creating a biological index for dietary pattern is something that I very much against. The more I think about this, just like there's no question that dietary pattern have served us well. I mean, Mediterranean dietary pattern is one example, but there's also very good dietary patterns. Professor Yang has been trying hard to develop Asian, what I call the Cantonese Western Pacific dietary patterns along that coastal area where as a population, the people of Hong Kong, Macau, the Cantonese, some of the Japanese live the longest on average. They are definitely not consuming a Mediterranean diet for sure. So you could argue you can develop easily a man-made dietary pattern that way to correlate it with all disease outcome of interest. Yes, it serves a purpose from a public health or commercial perspective to drive that industry forward. But scientifically, for us to understand mechanisms or truly to help individual patients moving forward, that is not that easy to do. That's just my view.
Okay, thank you. Simon, Gabriele, you had a question?
Simon, I think that your experience about the glycemic index and all the epidemiological studies that you yourself, but many other groups have performed, have clearly demonstrated that we, utilizing the available database, we are able to classify many foods, at least the foods that are more frequently used in terms of their glycemic index and therefore their impact on health. Even all the data have been presented by the Greek group and from Monica this morning. They all have utilized the available database, and they have clearly shown that low glycemic index is a better marker of a good diet for many aspects of health. Now, my question is, by enlarging this database to making it more sophisticated, including also foods that are not very frequently used, how much would improve our ability to define a diet which is more appropriate in terms of the health outcomes? So is it all these efforts that you are putting in this enterprise really worldwide? Also because you have to consider that this is an effort which is not going to end now, because there will be new foods coming in year by year, and so this is a kind of a never-ending story. So that's something that we should consider whether it is really worthwhile, or we stick to the available database with some imprecision, but in any case, we know that diet is taking some imprecision because we never know exactly what people are eating in terms of quantity or quality. And a final comment in relation to this, the quality, carbohydrate quality ratio. I agree that there is no real carbohydrate quality ratio. Probably what we should need, as you were mentioning, is a kind of marker of healthiness of a food in terms of promoting longevity. So if we were able to link food consumption to longevity, evaluating all the available data, but that would be probably something valuable for the consumer to say, okay, we know that consumption of this food with this frequency can promote longevity or can instead hamper longevity, because otherwise all the rest is very much associated to our subjective evaluation of different parameters. Thank you.
Do
Yeah.
other panelists have a comment?
Yeah.
I have some words. Yes, the GI database, I think many different foods in our country, especially more than Western foods. So the question is very good, as if we need to test all the food. So I think glycemic the index is almost for the carbohydrate. So we must solve the main problem. So in our country, I think the stable food is the most important problem. So we must to test the stable food, the bread, mantou, and rice, different kind of rice. I think this is important, but the milk, the vegetables, that's nothing. So we can make a step by step to solve the main problem. I think this is the first one. Second one, that we are individual. We are individual. We have different glycemic response one by one. Yes, this is a big problem for the glycemic index. So in recent years, I studied the individual response from the gut microbiome and other metabolism and age and other things used wearable devices. But this is very hard. I think we can, from small study and small by small, we make a big data, then we can make a model. So, though in my opinion, I can conclude the first one is the database we should start it with stable food. Second, we must think we are individual, so we are study from small and to big. So.
Laura's got a question. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. It's very exciting to hear that you're kind of trying to put together this nice database that can be used. In what you've done so far, is there an ability to predict GI of foods? Are you getting closer to something that's useful? Because for a lot of foods that are culturally diverse that maybe haven't been tested, or for new foods that are emerging on the market, especially in China, if you're getting low GI being something that's being picked up, if it's something that's not being tested, which does take time and it's not a simple test, is there any progress being made on parameters that can go into it with using machine learning and AI?
Totally. I mean, like, one of the major or basic functions of public health is surveillance, right? So, but before, you can argue based on this data, or like some of her presentation was based on all the literature data. That's another way to map it. So by using national survey, at least for the first time, we don't have this. I mean, we can all speculate what the GI have been going down or going up over the past 2 decades in the United States. Now, for the first time, we show it as surveillance. At least you can give the administrators or the policymaker to think about, in terms of looking at carbohydrate. This is the situation. Surveillance. I keep saying surveillance is a very important function of public health. Whether or not you advocate or do the education, that's bad, good or bad, that's slightly different in terms of improving individual as well as population health. Now, in that sense, doing the kind of prospective cohort studies such as the Harvard cohort, those are exceedingly difficult to do. And it's just so lucky. Lucky is like the light of leaders like Water and prior generation that set up that cohort, identified that population to establish the internal validity, that the association of interests that can allow us to make conditional inference, meaning condition on adjusting all these hundreds of, if not thousands of individual confounding factors. That's few and far between. And some folks, in fact, I discouraged some of my former trainees that returned to China, for example, into Japan. They set up their own cohort study. And I always ask them, what exactly is the question you have in mind? Surveillance, causal inference, or doing something that's different from what we have reported before from the Nurses' Health Study, let's say, right? To just show that internal validity has nothing to do whether or not it's generalizable to your population at all, right? So this, I hope I make that clear. It's subtle, but it's actually very, very different. Which unfortunate, what I hear that the funding is not, whatever that. Well, there's NIH have no directors at the moment. That a week ago they just fired 4 directors. So this not funding the nurses, it's idiotic because.
They-
Just an interruption there. I had a different impression of what Laura's asking. She's asking if there a way, an in vitro test to
In
predict the GI.
Oh yeah,
I'm
that's
thinking
your
of it-
study have shown.
Wait, from the perspective of translation to the population, like we know GI works, but then how do you
I'm already calculated the
educate
exact
that
GI.
to
Why do you
patients?
still want to predict them? Right?
Because it's expensive. That's what it is.
Well,
I can
there's-
say some words.
there's a lot of foods
because
that-
in our country and I think it's same as Australia, we product many low GI food. Maybe it's not low GI, but it's expensive and use human. So we in our country, several scientists started to set the model to. But I think in our group we started because different food have different model. Last year we started model is just for cereals. So the rice, noodles, and oats, but it's not for the diet. The mixed diet is not 准确的.
Not accurate.
Accurate,
so
yeah.
you're absolutely correct. You wanted to get away from calculating a food or any food, put automatic the glycemic index. I think it's a bad idea. I don't want any prediction is going to be
The
wrong.
thing is, now that you've got CGMS,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
you don't have to do a lot of expense. You just have people that are volunteers who wear the CGMS.
That's exactly
as
what
long
I.
as you want, and you ask them to test this at breakfast time, this food at breakfast time.
No, the new
on
technology.
Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and you can generate within a week
CGMS.
without a lot of expense the GI value of the food.
Right, you can do it like that, directly measuring it at the food levels. You still have to involve like 12, 18 people so you can reduce the in this case, the between person variation is a bad thing. You wanted to reduce them. So that's the reason why you have the sample size to get 12 to 18, which Tom Muller have worked out pretty well. The same thing. In fact, not only glucose, Jenny, now you can do, with his study, you can do this kind of non-invasive 24-hour measurement of ketone body, right? So clearly measuring the oxidation, beta oxidation process. So the technology is moving very, very rapidly. How can we incorporate them to improve?
Can I just follow up? No, it's John Simmons. So I think what Laura was getting at, or a question I have, is what you're doing with your databases. Like you're assigning, you have food that's close to an apricot, you're giving the apricot GI. You have a bun, and you're taking the average we have for buns and then assigning that GI. So it's more, I think, how you're applying it to databases and the use of AI for where you have missing data. Like we haven't tested all these foods yet. We're going to look at and monitor GI in the population, track trends. I guess it's like the tools we're using to do that. You're doing it manually, but are there AI tools that can do that better? And just, I think I was getting that sort of question from, or that's a question I have anyway from your presentation.
Well, totally. With the technology, there's no doubt in terms of this. Basically, for the mapping, it's just a large language model. The large language model, it's proven already with sort of like multiple times. There's no, in my view, is undisputable. But whether or not the food has ever been measured, that's a different story. If the food is not being measured, then there's some other works that for the past 3 or 4 decades, Jenny and many others experimenters has produced. Like your study have shown that based on some macro nutrient. Remember that bread study, different serving of bread, you see it predict the glycemic load pretty accurately. So we just use the same kind of data, but you still have to have guidance that come out from those experimental settings. Otherwise, it's just guessing.
Can I ask a question that I see as very practical? If you were in charge in China and you wanted to see a reduction in type 2 diabetes quickly, would you say that all rice should be a white, no GI rice, or just a wholemeal rice, a whole grain brown rice? What would?
He is actually in charge now.
Okay, he's in charge. So,
I think-
so what would your answer be? I'd love to know.
I think diabetes is not the only it cannot solved by only one things. I
No.
think you wear activity and the carbohydrate and something else. So in our channel, we have reduced our body, our weight lasted for 3 years. So I think body weight maybe is important.
So you put GLP-1s in the
Yeah,
water.
At one point,
No.
they
And
suggested
I
saying,
think the
standard.
glycemidex in the food will not or the low GI, maybe moderate GI is okay for us.
I just want to say some words for the diet GI about your question. I think the diet GI is a very good direction for us because, like we say, dietary guideline, we need the balance, everything in balance. If some food is high GI, we do not say we cannot eat it. We just say balance, maybe small service, something like this. So the diet GI is also like this. Like you see from the FAO, he said, what is the health diet? I have 4 indicators. One is balance, another one is diversity, another one is moderation. Have another one, I think. Yeah, totally the 4. So diet GI is almost like this. I don't say one food is high GI, I do not eat, but it's balance, everything. Yeah.
We used to say at the beginning when we were doing GI to people with diabetes, we just said try and eat half your carbohydrates as low GI carbs. They don't have to be all. You can still have some potato. All your favorite foods are still available, but try and have a low GI food at each meal.
Try low GI food, single food, but also add some vegetable if you need high GI food.
Yeah. So would you like people to have brown rice or a low GI white rice?
Yeah,
yeah,
I
so
need both, I think.
Would Chinese people accept a brown rice?
why not?
Why not?
Well, some people, some section of the population, not the whole
section, yes.
population, right?
Okay.
Not whole,
Your
You're
question cannot be
so big.
That's individual choice.
We like rice soft.
Yeah.
What's the time?
I think it's nearly, it's about 4:30.
So,
I think that's time to wrap up.
yeah, I'll let you wind.
That's interesting.
One last question from David. Oh, sorry, we'll make it to you, Olivia. Please try and make him short because
Thank you.
the time is short.
I just wanted to say we've questioned why we're wanting to make the new type of carbohydrate index, and we are asking ourselves, what does this actually treat specifically? And we're not sure. But I do think it's broad and it could depends on entirely what whole grains are, for example, because whole grains are difficult to define. They could be anything from porridge to popcorn. So, I mean, that is all whole grain. So I think that what I would like to see is perhaps some more emphasis on the basic science using the drug acarbose, which does create a low glycemic index diet. Artificially, it's true, but it can be used to look at mechanism and possibly, as Rory Holman showed with the ACE study, quite nicely to show the prevention of diabetes in a Chinese group, I must say, a large Chinese study. So I think these sort of studies can be undertaken to help us know where we're focusing with carbohydrate, and certainly where we're focusing with slow-release carbohydrate from the gut.
Thank you, David. And last question or comment from Livia. What, Walter, you have one too?
Just a quick one.
Okay. Yeah. Just over here. Not far away. You're close.
Okay, well, just a quick there's another aspect of whole grains that we haven't touched on, or this general discussion. What are you going to recommend? Is it just one form of rice or another form of rice? We really need to do more comparison of different grains too, because the literature, frankly, is based, most of whole grains is mostly based on wheat and wheat type plants, and there's almost nothing on maize at this point in time, and just a modest amount on rice. These grains, they're much more than just fiber or glycemic characteristics of the carbohydrate. Rice has hundreds of phytochemicals and things and minerals, and I think it's what Simon was alluding to. It's much more complicated than just a couple of variables. Actually, we really should be testing across species as well.
I agree. I think cutting it into white and brown rice is very naive. There are so many different kinds of rices, and they're used for different dishes, and they have very important cultural significance for many people. So I think it's a very naive argument. We must be more sophisticated in our description and enjoyment of food rather than reductionist and breaking it down into single nutrients and what have you. That's my thoughts. Livia.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there was a wonderful afternoon of presentations. Congratulations to everybody. And I wanted to pay special thanks to our members from China, because it's the first time they joined us at the ICQC on this side of the world. And I think everybody, at least for me, it was really interesting to see the GI data from China. I think also from many of us, because I saw many cameras going up and take pictures of the slides. So just one question to everybody, I guess more practical. Is anybody interested, or should we go ahead with the European Union GI labeling activities, or do you think it's a waste of time?
Can you just clarify that, what you're asking for?
Glycemic
Livia?
index activities of GI labeling of foods in Europe. So this kind of activity that we started in 2019 at the European Union in Brussels, at the European Commission.
I actually have some thoughts to that. Again, thinking from the physiological perspective, I think, should label glycemic low. Okay, in the serving, for example, why now you already present the gram of carbohydrate per serving? All you need is just glycemic load per serving.
Okay,
because
maybe
each one of those,
yeah.
each gram of glycemic load standardized. For glycemic index,
okay.
however,
I mean, this is a good idea, because maybe the European Union, the European Commission may be able to accept this better
Right.
than glycemic index.
Right.
And
Listen.
then from there, we can put GI in brackets.
no, you don't have to. But see, this is again confusing people. DGI.
Yep.
Should we go ahead with this activity?
Is labeling of GI or GL on foods in European Union something you'd like ICQC to pursue? Hands up.
See? Okay. So we'll, I'll
I
try
would
to,
say there's a clear majority.
okay, I'll try to then
Yes.
reactivate the path.
So the,
Yeah. No, no. Okay, well, Livia's already sort of outlined, I think it was a really interesting session. It was great to see not just the Chinese data, but also the Greece data too, which I hadn't seen, and a nice global overview. I thought that was very interesting. So really appreciate all of your time and efforts this afternoon, and I'm sure we're going to have a robust debate this afternoon and continuing over dinner, because there's lots we want to talk about. Thank you all, and see you soon for the tour.